On Primetime Politics, leading the response.
He'd actually be raising prices for American citizens as well, and hurting American industry and businesses.
As Ottawa makes the economic argument against Donald Trump's tariff threat, the Trudeau government is accused of being caught on the back foot. Could they have addressed security concerns long before the threat was made? We'll speak to our Ottawa bureau chiefs. Also,
so it's about covering the approaches to the north with various technologies.
Canada's Chief of Defence Staff, General Jennie Carignan, on Arctic defence and criticism of Canada's military commitments. Plus,
the German army came in and they were all murdered in Auschwitz.
Lessons from the past as a 92-year-old Holocaust survivor speaks out against xenophobia. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, if you were to summarize this past week in politics, you could use the three T's: tariffs, Trump, and Trudeau, with the last of those T's, the Prime Minister, being asked how difficult navigating the trade file will be now that Trump is headed back to the White House, with at least two advisors as well already expressing their preference for Pierre Poilievre. Well, take a listen to how Justin Trudeau answered a question about that on Friday.
Well, first of all, Canadians get to decide who forms the next government, and despite what Conservatives may be hoping for, there's a lot of Canadians scratching their heads at some of the decisions Pierre Poilievre has been making.
Now, the Prime Minister went on to say that he and Trump have already worked together in the past. He looks forward to working again in the future. And to talk about this, we're now joined by Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. Nice to see the three of you. I missed you last week. So listen, you know, we've heard it from the Prime Minister more than once that it's going to take this Team Canada approach in order to meet on any kind of challenge that comes about out of the Trump administration. But can he truly rally all the players if the poll suggests he's not going to be Prime Minister in a year's time? And also, when we're hearing from a couple advisors from the Trump team already expressing their positive opinion about Pierre Poilievre. Bob?
Look, I don't think it's going to be the same situation as it was in 2017 and 2018 when we renegotiated the NAFTA. There wasn't all Canada team approach to it, but the things have changed. As you have said, I mean, we're months away from an election campaign with a deeply unpopular government and a deeply unpopular Prime Minister. Mr. Poilievre has shown no inclination whatsoever to join this Team Canada approach. He's not going to do it. Why would he do any favors to Justin Trudeau? The premiers have not shown the same kind of Team Canada approach that we saw in the past. Doug Ford, who has been closer to this government than almost any premier, has come out being very critical of, particularly on the border issues, as has the Quebec premier, Daniel Smith of Alberta as well. So I just don't see you're going to see that same kind of unanimity, and that's because you have a Prime Minister who's weakened, and a Conservative leader who's doing very well, and the Trump people, many of the new appointees don't like him. So it's going to be really, really difficult for him to be able to pull it off.
What do you say, Tonda?
Well, in addition to, you know, the opposition from premiers, I think there's also a factor that the hardliners that are now in Trump's cabinet are unknown quantities to the Trudeau cabinet, and they haven't been able to strike up those relationships for a number of reasons. I mean, Biden is still president. Trump is not yet president. So addressing those and making those connections directly right now is a difficult thing for them to do. But I also think that overall the relationship is a bit more fraught because Mr. Trump is more emboldened by those hardliners and a little bit more unpredictable. So, you know, I think Premier Andrew Furia in Newfoundland said it best, like, you can have all the best plans in place, even on paper and people, and ready to pivot and be nimble, but how do you strategize for chaos? And that's what that Trump tweet or post on Monday night caused in this town. It caused chaos. It caused chaos across the business and union sectors in the country, and everybody was struggling to know how it would impact Canada and how do you respond. So I think it's even more broader than just Mr. Trudeau's unpopularity. I think there's a deep-seated anxiety around how do you deal with an unpredictable, even more volatile Mr. Trump.
Joël-Denis?
I think it would be a mistake on the part of the Prime Minister that he thinks he can assemble the same kind of people, the same kind of Team Canada approach to Trump 2.0. I was talking on Monday night after Mr. Trump announced his intention on social truth to a person who was very much involved into the negotiations the last time around. And he said he expects the Trump administration to do everything it can to weaken further Mr. Trudeau and his government because they don't like that government and that person. So we can expect that the next 6 months, while Mr. Trump arrives in the White House, will be more destabilizing for Mr. Trudeau's government because there will be, I think, a deliberate attempt on the part of the White House, led by Mr. Trump, to try to weaken Canada with the government.
But I also think that we shouldn't just say that it's all going to be all chaos too. I think you're going to see a significant effort by the provinces and the federal government to strengthen the borders, not only because of the concerns about fentanyl, but really the big concern about all these illegal migrants who may be coming up here to avoid mass deportations from the United States. But one of the most important parts of the old strategy, which is still very effective, is to engage with the 35 governors in the United States who principally trade with Canada, and for the U.S. business community, because of the supply chains that were so interconnected as an economy, even more so than in Mexico. So you've got to let American voices speak out for Canada for a change, and well, we're up here not sure what our government is doing. I think that's probably our most effective strategy.
And that is underway. Those kinds of connections and outreach efforts are underway and have been for a number of months, but ramped up this week pretty quickly.
I think because of the turn as well, though, right? Because ever since the Montreal caucus, about a year ago from the Liberals, they were talking about trade, but this tweet comes out, and it's not trade that he's raising. He's
tying it to borders.
To border security. And trade will be the impact, but ultimately these are security issues for the United States.
They are, and I just want to circle back actually to the whole idea of relationships, because in the weird aftermath of that tweet, we also got this sort of strange message from the Prime Minister's office about, contrary to everybody's assumption that the relationship is always antagonistic and confrontational between Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau, and contrary to what Daniel Smith, the Alberta Premier, suggested about this such deep personal animus, Trump and Trudeau appeared to have this conversation that for at least several minutes at the outset was all niceties and how's everything going, and only very belatedly when Mr. Trudeau raised it, well, what about this threat, this 25% tariff? So I just wonder how that also stands to play out. I mean, we don't really understand, I don't think we have other people's view of it, but I don't know that we really understand that relationship and how it might be leveraged.
Okay, I will say, we don't know the relationship, but again, we've heard a couple of advisors to Donald Trump expressing their preference, indirectly for Pierre Poilievre. And from Pierre Poilievre, take a listen to what he had to say about some of the concerns being raised by Donald Trump.
So we have Quebec sending in the Sûreté du Québec, their police force, to secure the border. Premier Smith, common sense leader, is proposing to use drones, provincial drones, and other police law enforcement measures from her province to secure the borders there. I understand Doug Ford is looking at something similar. So now, because Trudeau has so thoroughly broken the border, we're getting a patchwork of premiers who have no choice but to try and hold the border together with bubble gum, scotch tape, and elastic bands.
All of which I have in my desk, if any of you need it. But listen, Joël-Denis, I'll ask you on this one. No, I don't. I don't chew bubble gum. No. Okay. But listen, Joël-Denis, when you hear that from Pierre Poilievre, it does make me wonder, because here you have, again, security concerns being raised by Donald Trump. Has Canada laid itself open to this criticism by not getting ahead of this, just for our own sake, without even the Americans?
That's the exact point I was going to make, because we seem to be reacting to Mr. Trump all the time. Why not be proactive? Why was Mr. Dominique Leblanc, the security minister, did not announce that we would invest more to secure the border after the victory of Mr. Trump? He would have, faced the eventual threats from Mr. Trump right off the bat, even before he would have pronounced it. So we're late to the game, and we look very disorganized in terms of the Canadian strategy, and that's why you've got premiers telling the government what to do from Toronto or from Edmonton or from Quebec City, because there's a void. And when there's a void, somebody's trying to fill it to be able to reassure business people, Canadians, and Quebecers all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Bob, how much of this is our own making?
Oh, I think it's a lot of it is our own making. And after 9/11, our borders were basically shut down, and we brought in some significant security measures at the border that have been very effective. But in the last few years, the borders have become weaker. We've seen the influx of migrants coming into this country that's caused a significant drain in Quebec, but in Ontario as well, and they failed to act. And look, I think it's good that they're all getting together, and we are going to be able to do that. And unlike Mexico, Canada and the United States, we are really quite integrated with the U.S. law enforcement. The U.S. media have said, "Oh, Canada catches more people, have been caught more people trying to get into the United States." Well, that's because we're more effective than the Mexicans are. We do a much better job, but we do have to do much more. I mean, the drones and the helicopters and the hiring of more border guards and RCMP officers or police officers are absolutely a necessity, because we've got 4 years of chaos ahead of us.
Yeah, 4 years of chaos. What would you say about was there a possibility to get ahead of this before that social media post from Donald Trump?
Look, I don't know that it was possible to anticipate 25% tariffs, but they actually did have a campaign vow from Trump that he would impose 10 to 20% tariffs. So yes, I guess it was possible to anticipate that he could and was before, so we know his track record of being unpredictable and try to promote a reaction. I would hesitate, though, to assume that much could have or should have been done in advance to secure the border in this regard, because they did a lot on the Safe Third Country Agreement by giving themselves the ability to push back migrants. That's done. And secondly, there is that question of, I think that Mr. Trump still uses, and many of his people in key positions view tariffs as a tool of foreign policy pressure points. Yeah. So they would have used it anyway. I don't know that, there's a line about obeying in advance. Well, you almost need to see what it is he's threatening to then counter it. And lucky for us, he's tied it to border security. Well, we can address that. He hasn't yet tied it to some other foreign policy perspective or objective of his, say 2% NATO defense spending. That would be a harder one to address, right? So he's using tariffs as a sledgehammer to exact a foreign policy price. Right now it's border security. They're going to address that. Could it be something else down the road? We don't know. He and his advisors all support tariffs used in that way.
Mm-hmm. Sadly, I was going to touch on a whole bunch of other things, the $250 paycheck, when is the fall economic statement, but we've run out of time. World peace, but we're not going to get into it today.
Bubble gum?
Yeah, exactly. Bubble gum. There we go. Bob, Tonda, JD, thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Well, as we speak about criticisms Canada is hearing from our American neighbors, another issue that has been raised has to do with Canada's defense priorities. Not only how much Canada spends on defense, but how prepared Canada is to protect the Arctic for the continent and our NATO allies. They are all issues I discussed with Canada's Chief of Defense Staff General Jennie Carignan, who I caught up with last weekend at the Halifax International Security Forum. General, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Now, when you were originally appointed Chief of Defence Staff, and that was just this past summer, you were talking about how Canadian forces have about a 5-year run-up. And I'm wondering if you need to revisit that timeline, because as we see the delegates come together here from many different countries, and we see the situation in Ukraine, the fact that Russia, despite the West aiding Ukraine, continues to attack the country, do you need to revisit that timeline as to how you can ramp up Canadian forces?
So the timeline is really based on our efforts to go back to our full complement of personnel within the forces. So that's the whole effort behind the recruiting and the onboarding of new personnel. So we want to accomplish that within the next 5 years. But within that 5 year as well, we are going to be integrating new capabilities that are absolutely required for the present, to counter the present threat and for the future one. And of course, we are also working a longer term, the 5 to 10 year horizon, to onboard more capabilities. And this timeline is determined on the assessment of the threat, but also in collaboration with our allies as to making sure that we address the gaps that we have within the alliance.
You talk about ramping up the defense staff, except that when you look at the numbers, you see thousands of the people applying, but not everybody actually gets to be trained. What are you actually looking for that only a fraction who step forward actually become a part of Canadian forces?
So it is really, it's a mix, like recruiting is a very complex process because we are dealing with human beings. So within that, some people decide within the process that it's not for them. Sometimes we are not fast enough to exploit the opportunity of having this person in. It's our processes, but also it's the choice of trades. We have 107 different trades within the military. But our new personnel coming in have a broad range of choices. So again, and then some trades require more people and others are already full. So it's the management of our needs as well that is all brought together. But what we are doing currently is streamlining our process. So this fall, and we have already changed many aspects of our processes, our standards, our security screenings. So this is all getting streamlined, and then with modernized medical standards starting in January. So again, recruiting in 2024 are not, we need to change in accordance with today's Canadians.
Need to change. How much of that also is ramping up Canadian Forces' capacity to train new recruits? Do you have the infrastructure to actually train as quickly as you need to get numbers back up?
We do, and you're absolutely right. We need to ensure that our capacity to train all these new recruits coming in is set and ready for that. So the team is currently working at making sure that with the numbers coming in and the trades that are going to be needing training, that the process is streamlined throughout. So you can appreciate that with many different trades, the path to qualification is not the same for everybody. So a mechanic is not the same as an infantry person or as a pilot. So again, it's addressing that with the whole team together. So now it's streamlining that whole process to ensure that we are training our new personnel in the most effective manner.
Effective. I'm also wondering about the skill set, beyond the trades, beyond the capacity to be a part of the new Canadian Forces. There's also an updated defense policy, and that very much has a focus on the Arctic. How does training have to change? Because quite frankly, in terms of how we have trained Canadian Forces, there hasn't really been much of an Arctic focus.
We've always trained for winter warfare. We've always trained with our equipment. We have always collaborated with our rangers in our northern areas, conducting search and rescue. We have regular exercises, Operation Nanook, that is conducted in 4 phases throughout the year, and it is focused on the north. And then preparing reserve units as well as Arctic companies. So
we need to intensify that, though, because if the focus is going to change on the Arctic, arguably what you have done needs to be even far more in depth.
So what needs to happen in the Arctic is a permanent presence. So it's airstrips, it's ports, it's support hubs, it's building communities to be able to detect and as well deter some of the threats that we might see happening in the Arctic. So it's not just about what we are doing now, but it's also building the infrastructure in the north to ensure that we can actually operate the new systems. So it's about covering the approaches to the north with various technologies, whether it's ground-based or it's satellites, or so all these systems are going to be coming on board. But again, the training as it is when we're talking about land-based, we're already making lots of progress in that way. But the rest will need to come in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. So of course we'll watch in the next 3 years. We're also at a point where we are looking at a new administration going into the United States, an administration that is far more vocal of its criticism of Canada's defense spending, investments, commitments. I'm wondering what you've heard about that here at the Halifax Forum.
So the relationship military to military with our colleagues in the United States is extremely stable. So this is what my U.S. colleagues are telling us. We've maintained that relationships for many years, whether it's in NORAD or it's with NATO or in the Indo-Pacific. So the military-to-military relationships are very strong and will continue because, again, we share the same continent and then we share the defense of and the approaches to Canada and the United States together. So I'm not worried at all about our relationships going forward.
Okay, so you're confident in the relationship. I do want to get some commentary, though, because here in Halifax, we heard a U.S. Senator, James Risch, comment on women in combat roles.
I think it's delusional for anybody to not agree that women in combat creates certain unique situations that have to be dealt with. I think the jury's still out on how to do that.
I'm wondering what your reaction is to it, because beyond you, there were a number of female officers from different countries in that forum reacting to what was said by the senator. What's your reaction to what we heard?
Well, of course, I reacted the next day to make sure that nobody left the forum with the idea that women are a distraction or some kind of social experiment being part of their military in service to their country. So of course I made an intervention to make sure that at least there was a counter argument to what was said. So just wanted to make sure that there was a different view that was
what
offered.
Is that view?
And the view is that women have been serving in the military for many years, and they have fought for their country for hundreds of years. The thing is that it has always been forgotten. Women have been demobilized after conflicts, and their history as fighters and warriors has been set aside and forgotten. So it's not a social experiment. With 39 years of service in the combat arms, I've risked my life in many operations across the world. I can't believe that we're still having this discussion in 2024. That was my reaction. And when we have women who step into harm's way, they deserve to be recognized for their contribution. So that was the argument. And now, I control only what my area of influence is. So this is what I'm focusing on. You know, our allies and partners can decide how they want to manage this space, but at least I felt it was my responsibility to make the argument.
General, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Now, General Carignan is not the only voice we heard in Halifax. Another was that of Manfred Lindenbaum, now 92 years old. Mr. Lindenbaum is a Holocaust survivor. Separated from his parents when he was only 7 years old, he escaped Germany thanks to an organized Kindertransport. And as you will hear, thanks to that refugee effort, he and his brother survived. But the other members of his family did not. And Manfred Lindenbaum, well, he now uses his voice to speak out against xenophobia and the vilification of migrants.
So my mother and father, they were heroes in being able, in the midst of chaos, turning me over to this stranger. And when I see views of refugees at borders today, that memories of me came back. And when I heard the separation of children from their parents, I had nightmares for several days after that, because I know that many of those kids who were separated at our border by the American government, by President Trump, will never recover, because it took me 20, 30 years, because I was really a troubled problem kid for everybody for a long period of time, for years. And they got us to the border ahead of the German army coming in, and we got on a Polish troop ship, the Warszawa. I was 7 at that point, and I was there with my brother. They refused to let my 14-year-old sister get on, and I remember I ran away and she dragged me back and held me down while they shaved the lice off my head and shoved me on board. And I later found out she had managed to find her way across Poland and had rejoined my parents, and the German army came in and they were all murdered in Auschwitz. And I think my saddest memory is that I cannot really remember my mother and father because I was so angry at them. Well, my sister, she's with me every day, and she's up in that cloud saying, "What did you do to make a difference today?" And that has never left me. My experience has made me look around at refugees, and I speak in schools a lot, but the whole idea of the Niedermensch, of a lower person, it is such a horrible, disgusting thought, because I don't care who you are, you have much more in common with me than you have differences.
Holocaust survivor Manfred Lindenbaum. Now, in the coming days and weeks, we'll have more from the Halifax International Security Forum. But if you want to see any of the discussions and the speeches right now, you can check them all out on our website, cpac.ca. Well, that is our program for today. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.